the Informatics Europe is an organization. And just for your information, we will be recording the session so that we can also put it for the people who cannot be present online right now. So Informatics Europe is, for those of you who do not know the organization, is actually a non-profit organization funded in 2005. It started as an organization of rectors and deans involved in informatics education, and then became more generally a public and private research community organization. So the idea is to talk and discuss strategies and policies that have to do with informatics inside Europe. So the members are institutions, not individuals, but institutions such as departments, institutes, faculties, research labs, and companies across Europe. Currently, we have a pretty good representation of Europe, about 45,000 researchers across 170 institutions. You can see here the number of members per country. So it's a good representation in terms of countries. We are growing over time. We had a growth rate of about 10 to 14%. And originally, a lot of universities were involved, and we're trying to increase also the private participation. Labs like Google Europe and Microsoft Research Europe are partners too, but of course it would be nice to have even more, and also small and medium enterprises. But so it's a growing organization. The idea is to really try to represent research and education on informatics in Europe. And of course, the more people, the more institutions participate, the louder is the voice, or in other terms, the more effective is the influence that we can have on policies and strategies at the European level. There is a board of which I'm a member of this organization, but there's also the chances for everybody who's a member to get involved. This happens mostly through working groups. You can see the list of current working groups on the left: educational research, ethics, open science, sustainability, and so on. And the idea is that these are open to any member. So if you have some expertise, some talent, and especially interest in any of these topics, you're absolutely welcome to join and provide your support, your help, your knowledge, your network for these topics. The one on diversity and inclusion is the specific one who is organizing the webinar of today. And many of these working groups are done in partnership with other groups, organizations like Digital Humanities, Informatics for All, but also with projects, for instance, European funded projects like UGAIN, Inclusion for You, Ethics for You, and so on. So the idea is that all the members are absolutely welcome to participate and help and support Informatics Europe, and yeah, just be active members, let's say. The Society has a meeting which is yearly. This is the European Computer Science Summit. In 2023, it will be in Edinburgh in October, and the early registration is still open. It is not a technical conference. It is rather a place where we go to discuss strategies, policy issues, and things which are relevant for informatics in Europe in the next years. There are a number of keynote speakers. You can find the list of the past keynote speakers of the past. And also all the working groups typically go there to report on the current activities and discuss the future activities. So it's also a good moment or a good way to get involved in those working groups if you actually can participate in person. So I hope, I mean, there's not too many people participating right now, but also people who see this maybe offline later, do consider registering for this event, and then we can see each other face to face and talk about how to make Informatics Europe and informatics in general for Europe more better. Now, this was not the plan. Sorry about that. Okay, here we are. What does Informatics Europe do? Well, what is going on here? For some reasons, my slides are gone. Okay, I guess you can't see them, right?
Oh, it's. Oh.
Can you see the slides?
No, it's gone.
Yeah.
No, like
Blinking.
Yeah, it's blinking exactly.
Okay.
So it's visible and then it disappears, but then it's visible
Sorry
again.
about that. Let me try this again. Can we cut from the recording, or is this going to be there forever?
Yeah. Or we can just skip and introduce our speaker
Yeah, so okay, I
directly.
think I'll just finish this without the slides because I'm having a problem with Keynote right now. Apologies for that. Anyway, the services that the Informatics Europe gives, just to mention a couple which might be relevant or interesting for you. It provides awards. For instance, there is a Minerva Award, which is about equality to support female careers in informatics. There's a Best Dissertation Award done in collaboration with Springer, and then there's a academic leadership development courses. There's possibility of supporting education and departments who want to have evaluation of their education in informatics, so a number of services. The talk of today is co-organized with the UGAIN project. UGAIN is a European cost action project about gender equality in informatics. And finally, I would like to come to the matter at hand. So to the talk, it's a pleasure to have Ayushi Rastogi from University of Groningen to give a talk here today. She has expertise as the boundary between software engineering and AI, and especially she looks at the productivity of teams, of software teams, with particular emphasis on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. So it's a real pleasure that she accepted to give this talk today, and now I would leave the floor to her.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Marco, for the introduction. As briefly introduced, today I would like to share my work and experiences around the challenges and opportunities of gender inclusion worldwide in the case of open source software. And it's my pleasure to present this for Informatics Europe's webinar on gender equality. So let me start by just briefly giving you a brief introduction about myself, what I do. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Groningen, and I mostly work on solving problems that are relevant to software industry, but also society. And for my research, I rely on software data. And you can think of software data as something that is generated while you are either developing software, or when you are using software. And this data has a lot of signals which can tell you insights about what might have been going and how can we improve it better. I'm also a member of IPN and Informatics Europe's group on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And IPN is a representative body in Netherlands, while Informatics Europe, as Marco introduced, represents several institutes all over the Europe and more. So in this talk, there are two elements that I'm going to focus on. First, I'll try to describe or characterize the current state of gender diversity as it is in open source software. And second, how can we build inclusive communities? Basically, what actionable things that we can do. So just, as a teaser or an initial peek into what you may find, some of the insights we observed were that there is a marginal rise in gender diversity, with Eastern Asia and North America leading in terms of diversity. And then we also described several challenges and opportunities where the research and even several other participating stakeholders, including the software industry and government, can have a role to play in order to improve diversity. So I'll start this talk by making a remark, and of course, feel free to counter it, is I believe that if we have to make a better software and society, it has to start by making better software teams. And of course, while the link may not be so obvious, in the coming few slides, I'll try to describe why this is the case. So whenever I think about software, I think about this pottery making class. And the reason is that software in the current world, given its pervasiveness, has a very important role in shaping the society. It is influencing how we interact, how we socialize, and even today, how we are all in distinct places and listening to this talk and so on. And while software has such a foundational role, I believe that in order to make better software, we have to understand the forces shaping it. And now, no surprise, who are the people who are behind the design of the software? These are the various stakeholders who in various capacities are coming together to make the software. It could be the government policies, but it could also be the industry with a need. But at the core, it is those software teams which are sitting together and translating these visions that we have into reality. And in addition to that, just adding why not just software, we have to think about open source software, because in the current times, 97% of the applications and the 90% of the companies are using open source code. So if we have to understand software, we have to understand open source software. And if we want to make any of these better, we have to understand the teams or the people that are developing it. So I'll start with a bit of a background, like how we came to reach to the study, what went in the making of it. I'll give you some of the articles from different countries, and I hope that motivates you enough into why this is important. So this first article is from the United States, where they found that women earning computer degrees rose since the mid-1990s, and yet they comprise just a quarter of the computing professions. If you folks are interested in reading more about it, I have linked all the actual articles in the footnote. The next is from India, NASSCOM, where they report that women are concentrated at lower career level, and there are fewer women in top positions in IT companies in India. So on one hand, we see that there are fewer people entering the profession. Even when they enter, it's more likely to find them at lower career levels. And another article by European Commission even goes on to say that if more women enter the digital job market, it could create an annual GDP boost of 16 million euros in Europe itself. And I think what I was simply trying to point you to, that this gender gap or the need for attention has been recognized worldwide. There are problems at several levels that need attention. This is another figure which really draw my attention. It's also by European Commission, which shows the gap in the gender pay across different countries. So one thing obviously is that even when we are talking about gender gap, it kind of gives an impression that it's not same for everything. Generally, when we talk about gender diversity or gender gap, we think of an all-inclusive. But this one simple figure shows that even across different countries and even within Europe, it could simply vary what gender diversity means. And this was also pointed by another article by European Commission, which found that the digital and online engagement can shift across geographical regions in addition to the gender. So these were like examples in general, and now I'll quote some examples specific in software engineering, which have inspired this research. So talking about the gender, it is one of the first inspiring work that we noted was that there are no differences in the work practices of men and women developers. And yet, there is another study which shows that the contributions from women developers are less likely to be accepted. This particular study divided the analysis into two parts, where in one case, the gender identity of women developers could be identified, and in the other case, it could not be identified. And they observed that the cases where the gender identity was identifiable, the chances of code contributions acceptance was less, while when their gender identity was not identifiable, they had a higher chances of code acceptance in comparison to their male counterparts. And this was also witnessed in the vertical and horizontal segregation of findings. Another series of studies found that the disparity in the evaluation of source code contribution is not just gender-based, it also varies regionally. So depending on which part of the world you are contributing from could have an influence in how your code contributions could be evaluated. And this further led to more series of investigations where people started looking for signals more related to geography. It could be ethnicity, as the next study says, where they found that white developers have higher chances of code acceptance than non-white developers, but even also the role of culture and so on. And this was the foundation where we felt that while we are studying gender and geography independently, there is a lot that might be happening at their intersection. And this exploration was just to understand those challenges and opportunities and what we can do about it. So before delving deep into what the work was done, I want to point about who were involved in this research. And it was a very conscious choice we had to involve people from different parts of the world, including academia and industry, and also in terms of gender. We wanted to capture the insights that are a better reflection of what we think in academia and industry, but also from different perspectives. So let me start with describing the current state of practice. So in order to measure gender diversity in open source software, we mined the archived software data on GitHub. For those who might not be aware of GitHub, it is currently one of the widely used web hosting platform for software projects. Of course, today now it's being used for so much more than software development, but currently it's home to one of the largest code base and the biggest developer community worldwide, with participation from hundreds of countries all over the world. So for this analysis, we identified 21,456 software projects, which were not just something developed for, let's say, a classroom project, are widely active and so on, but some of the other features that were very important for us was that we could, to some extent, reliably infer the location, but also the gender of the participants. And just to give you a sense, this information may not be obviously available on these platforms because these platforms are designed to capture the development activities. And we are using them as signals and proxies to understand more. So of course, if you're curious into how we could infer these insights and where it brings limitation, feel free to refer to the paper. But here, in the interest of time, I'll focus on the key insights, or what are those current traits that we observed. So in terms of gender diversity, this is what we noticed across the different parts of the world. We measured gender diversity using Blau index. And just for everyone to understand what Blau index here means, imagine if a team has 4 men and for one person, we could not identify their gender, which by the way, we will exclude. The Blau index will be 0, indicating that there is no diversity in terms of gender. But imagine there's another team in which there are 2 men, 2 women, and 1 unknown. In this case, the Blau index would be 0.5 because among the 2 participating genders that we have in this exploration, they are represented equally. And as much as we are talking only in terms of men and women, we very much acknowledge that there are also non-binary gender. But I think in the current format, we are limited by how the existing techniques and technologies can help us identify the other genders more reliably. And that's why we very much limit ourselves to this analysis. So now that we have this range where 0 means no diversity and 0.5 being the maximum, I think now it makes more sense to see what these different numbers represent. So as you may see across different parts of the world, the gender diversity index is different, not statistically different, but still different, but they are still very less. So on such a large scale, on this platform where we can measure, we notice that the gender diversity is generally low worldwide. That being said, we also decided to see that over the years, so many initiatives have been made. People are talking about the awareness, governments are making policies and programs and initiatives. How has it impacted our understanding of gender diversity, or how has it influenced in general? So to capture that effect, we computed the diversity index at 2 different points in time, one in 2014 and the next in 2019. And in 5 years time interval that we looked, we noticed that there has been a very marginal improvement, but there is a slight change in terms of gender diversity improvement. And you may see here on the top that in the last 5 years, the 2 regions which have been leading in terms of gender diversity include North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, while the countries which are lowest in the list are Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. So this is just to give a sense of how these different regions perform, but also a wake-up call for all the regions where so much more can be done to improve gender diversity. And that brought us to our next investigation, where we were curious to understand that maybe now more women are entering the open source, maybe more people are joining GitHub. So for the duration of 5 years, we computed what percentage of new entrants belong to different gender. And as you may see over the years, that women continue to constitute approximately 10% of the overall population. Although there's another fun fact that you may see, that over the years, now more and more people are choosing not to report their gender. Now, there could be several explanations. One simply could be that maybe people now know that knowing their gender identity could have influenced the outcome, and hence people choose not to report, or maybe people are just bored by the number of surveys that they receive from researchers that they now just refrain from. But jokes aside, I think at least from what we know about gender in terms of men and women, we don't see an increase in participation from women in open source projects over the years. And that's something we definitely can focus on. When we were doing this analysis, which is at the intersection of region and gender diversity, one of the pressing questions that crossed our attention was that what does it mean to improve gender diversity? Or what does it even mean to improve regional diversity? And this prompted us this question that could we believe that if we are, for instance, improving gender diversity, maybe it also improves the regional diversity. And we computed this analysis for different regions and even at different levels of granularities. And what we found that even though there is a statistically significant relation, the effect size is very marginal and marginal to negative. So something which we at least noticed from the current trend of the data is that teams which are more diverse in terms of gender are not necessarily diverse in terms of geography. And of course, while more investigations are required to understand why we see this, what could have caused this behavior, it could also raise a very important question that there is no one solution to improve diversity in general. Maybe trying to focus more on one aspect in terms of diversity may have a negative impact in terms of the other. But of course, I think what this data analysis simply opened up is more channels for understanding what we know, where we are, and where we can go further. So these were the insights that we could derive from the data that we extracted from GitHub projects. But this is just what the data shows. It's very important to back these arguments or to enrich our understanding by also gathering the perspectives and insights from people and what they feel. So in order to understand the challenges and opportunities, we had two unique goals in mind. One, we wanted to not just understand the problems, but also the local achievements. And I think these are the things that often get lost when we always see something as a whole. So there are some regions which are doing better. What can we learn from them? There could also be problems that are unique to a region. And what is there we can do to improve that? So here we asked three kinds of questions. One, just to understand that what are the reasons for which people join a project, continue participation, and leave. And we were very interested to understand that maybe there are some differences based on the gender or maybe the region. Relatedly, we were curious on the role of peer parity, which would mean that would I be more interested in working on a project if I find someone like me? And someone like me could mean in terms of gender, but it could also mean in terms of the region or the shared culture or some other aspect. And the third aspect was their experiences in what challenges they believe are inhibiting, but also what they think are the opportunities ahead. So since here our goal was not just to survey, but also gather perspectives from different gender and geographic region, we conducted a stratified sampling where we ensured that from each region, we contact a similar number of participants and also ensure some sort of parity in terms of gender. Now, we tried our best, but of course, from some regions, we had fewer developers to begin with, or even fewer developers for a certain gender. But we chose, let's pick 50 developers per gender per region, and requested them to link their responses to specific projects. We contacted approximately 1,500 developers for this research. And in the end, we received 118 survey responses, which is like 8% response rate. But notably, and I think we consider this as our success, that we received one response from women for every 4 responses from the men developers. And even just reaching this parity in responses was a huge success for us. So all in all, we try to see what kind of motivations, what kind of reasons they have, and try to understand if there are any differences based on gender or region. We did not find any, but there were subtle cues, there were subtle things which some people had preferences over the others. And I'm going to only talk about those subtle nuances which people can use in order to contribute to better formation of teams. So one of these was that women developers emphasized social aspect. And what that meant was that when we asked this question, that would you select a project with friends and colleagues? And the response was that this was important for women much more than for men. And if you're curious where this question comes from, this has been inspired by the several research that have been done previously in software engineering. And we collected all these list of questions to understand which of these factors are more important for one than the other. The next aspect we had was about the shared identity. And here again, women find that shared identity is more important to them in comparison to the men. And regionally also here, we started to see some difference. That shared identity was to some extent important for developers in America, Europe, and Asia, with different extent, of course, but it was not at all important for Africa. And now you get a better sense of who cares about what when they are looking for a project. Another aspect was monetary incentives for their work. And here again, female women developers experienced or indicated that they feel that money is a better incentive in comparison to the men developers. And even for the location, for Africa, it was a bigger motivation. But here is a quick nuance that the countries or the regions which are not indicating money as an incentive are also the ones which are more likely to be incentivized for their work or contributions to open source. And I'm talking about Europe and America. But now we also know that since fewer developers in Africa are being paid for their contribution to open source, monetary incentive could be a way to bring them in. Now, having these insights, the question is, how can we build inclusive communities? And the three major themes that emerged included to building friendlier communities. This was one of the comments we received from one of the survey respondents, that promoting use of and enforcement of code of conduct. And I think when they emphasized about the code of conduct, it was seen by them as a proxy of that there is a mechanism in place that will ensure that their interests are also taken care of. And also for those people who are more likely to breach code of conduct, it's also a wake-up call that there might be actions taken if they choose not to abide by this code of conduct. So these advice or recommendations mostly apply to organizations and policy makers, but one advice could be to enforce and incentivize code of conduct. So the latest research we know is that less than 10% of projects are using code of conduct. So for instance, if there are incentives for the adoption of code of conduct, it could perhaps encourage the people from marginalized communities to also join the project. But there is a catch. There is a chance that while there is a code of conduct, it may or may not be enforced. And that's where it becomes important to also have some sort of social metrics for self-evaluation of the community. So we are thinking of something like a Glassdoor, where people can share their experience, or maybe just some sort of matrix which can be used to assess the quality and can limit the misuse of the code of conduct. Another thing is highlighting role model. So one of the survey responses we received indicated that we want more women reviewers, more women acting directly on the governance of large open source projects. And this kind of made us believe that people are looking for the role models. They are looking for someone who they look up to be in those positions of responsibility. And here again, our advice is for the organization, but also policymakers to think about the following: that can we implement some proximity-based mentorship, which could mean that finding someone in your region who could perhaps is in a position of responsibility and can inspire you offline, not just always online. And even creating these small channels and networks could really encourage participation from regions and gender who are marginalized in those projects. But another thing could also be to even highlight the role models from these underrepresented groups. So if I can give an example from GitHub, they have this page called GitHub Explore, which highlights the key achievements, the best that is going on. And one simple solution could be to have a section for highlighting the role models from these underrepresented groups. But there could also be other channels just beyond GitHub and maybe even applicable to other platforms, like having talks where they can describe their experiences so that other people from the same shared identity could also feel inspired to work in the informatics. The third aspect is research with social consideration. And I think this is where it's a call for researchers where they can help. One is project recommendation systems. So in the current settings, the way project recommendation system works is that, oh, if you like a user, if you follow their work, it's likely to recommend projects that they use. And of course, this project has merits because you are likely to find projects that are of your interest. But if we think also from the social point of view, could the recommendation also include that, hey, this project has X% developers from your region or your gender? And this would already be a motivation that, hey, this is a place where I'm more likely to feel included. I have a community, I have a shared identity. And these kinds of it's a change in perspective in how we are building the tools, how we are building the technology that has to be used for future. Another could be simply improving the documentations automatically. So one of the barrier to entry is, especially across regions, is where the documentation is not available in your regional language, or where there is almost no documentation. And here, these automated tools or solutions, which can provide some insights into what this project works about, or this is about, could already be an incentive or be more attractive to those people who want to contribute, but cannot because they just don't understand what's going on. And the third aspect is about developer assignment. And I think this is very crucial because in the current way the technology is being developed, the focus is on speed. We want to make the most accurate decision. We want to find the most the expert on a topic. And as a result, we end up picking the same people again and again, providing limited opportunities to the newcomers, providing less space for doing challenging tasks to these people. And a lens that could be taken is that, can the algorithm also include to distribute challenging tasks, not just based on experience, but also based on their interest, also based on who might be interested in those topics. So this was a very software engineering specific call, but if we talk about even other fields who can take inspiration from this research, I think one aspect is to quantify and set baseline. So simply by measuring using the indicators that are available in the field could be helpful in assessing the change over time. What we observed in case of GitHub and open source software was a marginal improvement, but it still gives a ray of hope to continue further, to make better processes, to make better plans, and so on. The second, of course, is to create awareness so that we can make concrete observations to alleviate these diversity issues. I think one of the reasons and the key forces of having industry involved in this project was to make sure that the suggestions or the advice we come up here could also be applied in practice. And finally, in-depth regional exploration. If there is one thing that we learned here is that even though while by and large the challenges developers' experience in different parts of the world or based on gender might be different. But the solutions to enable them or the solutions to make them feel included could be very regional specific. So if we can take into these cultural nuances by studying the specific aspect of the research, it will be very empowering, not just to that region, but also to the community as a whole, which is currently more inclined to believe that the issues related to gender or geography are like a one big bunch. And taking into account these considerations or these cultural nuances would lead to solutions that work for the diverse need of diverse audience. So now that we have discussed this, I'll give a very quick brief summary of everything that we discussed so far before we jump to the last slides. So in terms of the state of practice, we noted that there is low gender diversity across the regions worldwide. We also noticed that since 2014, the time where we first recorded the changes, there is a very small improvement in gender diversity. Of course, there is a long road ahead to where we want to be, but there are regions where there is a huge improvements in terms of diversity, and this includes North America and Southeastern Asia. So I guess this is a place where Europe in general may have to think, what can we do as all in order to promote diversity? And we also provide 3 key action items of what we can do to build inclusive communities and who could be the various participating stakeholders for this. So to develop friendlier communities, we are looking at the community itself, but also organization. For highlighting the role models, again, we are looking at organizations and initiatives that can enable these things. And in terms of software engineering tools to promote diversity, I think research has a lot more to offer in this. So with this, I conclude this talk. If you're curious to read more about this work, you can refer to the QR code here. And we have also shared the entire data that was used for this research because we want to enable others to build on our work. And should you have any questions, feel free to ask me after this talk. But of course, even if later you want to contact me, you can contact me via email and also Twitter. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. And indeed, we have some time for questions. I see one hand which is raised.
Yes, it is me. Yes, thank you very much. It was such an interesting talk. So nice to listen. I'm looking forward to having the recording available on YouTube. I think it would be very nice to share it with more people because it's very, very interesting. I was wondering, it was very interesting to hearing about those different things that are important to different genders and especially to women. One.
Barbara, I guess you're muted.
Yes. Sorry about that. I mistakenly clicked on that. So one of the things that was interesting to me was when you were speaking about the shared identity. Could you expand on it? Like, is it that like how like what kind of like shared facets you believe that are important for women and they search for in terms of this shared identity and beyond that could help them to engage in these projects?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara, for the question. So when I refer to shared identity, it can have different meanings in different contexts. So in the case of gender, it could be simply looking for someone same gender as yourself. Mm-hmm. So during this survey, we asked not just women developers, but also men developers, to what extent is this important? And that's where you start to see the differences start to emerge because there are already few female developers. For some, it is important and to some extent encouraging to know that there are other female developers in the team. And this could be their friends, which currently is most likely that why they know about the project. But it could also be that if in future, when they are looking for prospective projects to join, if we can announce this knowledge that, hey, there are X% female developers in the team, and it would already be an encouragement because it would show that this project or the culture of this project is conducive for female developers to work. And I think that's a bigger signal than simply having code of conduct, I would say, because it shows that whatever practices this team has, this project has, work, that if other female developers are also finding this as a conducive environment to work, maybe this will be a conducive environment for them as well. But while I'm saying just about gender, I think this notion of shared identity even applies in the case of region. But we did not find anything as contrasting as what we observed in the case of gender.
Very interesting. If I can have a follow-up question to that, yeah, it is like absolutely, as you said, it is also confirmed by some studies on the research co-authors, right? There was a very nice paper on analyzing co-authors for research papers in the main conferences of different fields. So like for software engineering, there was the XCS, like FSC, etc. But there were also other fields, and they indeed find out that women are more likely to have a female co-author than men, which is surprising because that means that either there are 0 women co-authors or there are multiple. It's unlikely there is. There is. It's unlikely that there is just a single woman in a group of co-authors. I was wondering, do you think that like in this shared identity there is a threshold, like a critical mass that like at least this percentage of people of shared identity is required so that the shared identity kind of is fulfilled for the women? Do you think there is such a percentage of critical mass that like 5% women is too little, but at 15+% I already feel that shared identity? What do you think?
That's a very good question, Barbara. I don't have a definitive answer for you at this moment, but I would like to reflect on a few thoughts. So given the teams we analyzed, what we observed was that in any case, the diversity index was very low. So talking about 10%, 15%, it might be possible in some cases, but not in many projects. And
yes.
So I think, to begin with, even just knowing that there are, other female developers might be a good indication. But in terms of percentage, I think we would only be able to talk once we are talking about a diversity index, which is much closer to balanced. And I think we are far, far from there. So it might happen in cases where we are compiling teams on our own, where we can ensure this kind of diversity. But in the more naturally occurring teams, which have formed naturally over the years, I'm not sure if we might be able to assess such an impact, at least right now.
Yeah. It nicely connects to the topic of the critical mass. So the critical mass is percentage. If you get like for a minority to actually stop feeling being a minority, stop feeling being a disadvantage among the majority. And I didn't find much research on that for computer science. Maybe you have read some studies. When I was trying to research it, like what is the critical mass so for women developers or engineers over which they actually the situations start to kind of balance or resolve itself spontaneously, then there are different studies doing this in other fields. For example, women in politics, or women in leaderships, like women in boards, or then other ethnicities among the majority, etc. I didn't find much about like women in technology, but those studies, there are some studies that are trying to refer at least to those others, and they speak about 30% is that critical mass, or they speak about 25% of confident individuals. So when it's like 25% of confident individuals, which is, for example, happening when these are people who are very opinionated and are not afraid to, like speak up and actually be heard, be seen, then the percentage can be around 25%. Otherwise, they speak about 30%, and we are no close to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you read some study or somebody thinking about what would be the critical mass for open source? Like when you reach that, the situation kind of resolve itself?
That's a good question. I haven't heard of studies which talk about critical mass, but I think a part of the problem could again be the fact that we don't see that much of that many projects which have a critical mass to investigate. But
yes.
I'm sure, I think first step, if of course we have to start these investigations, could be from student projects, trying to make teams where we can understand at what percentage of critical mass does it get more convenient for people with different perspectives to be able to express themselves without feeling the pressure from the majority of that. But yeah, I'm sure like these would be some of the natural next steps where informatics has to go. But we are really looking forward teams to become more and more diverse, and not just in terms of gender, which again, we currently have a very narrow definition to just talk about men and women, but also in terms of other aspects that are important.
Yeah, absolutely. I will like one thing that I have found, for example, when I was doing this, like trying to find some clues for the critical mass. One interesting information I found, I think I would find a paper somewhere, was that when the representation of the minority is below 15%, you are very likely to actually not have the real cognitive diversity, because for example, when we look at women and men, the women in those below 15% are cognitively more similar to the men than to other women. So that's why they choose these spaces. And sometimes even, like they would feel more comfortable in the men environments anyway. So then that's why these critical masses are over 25 or 30%, because if a woman who would be rather representative of the majority women group would join that space, she wouldn't have that shared identity with the women in that space.
Yeah.
So that was also very interesting to me.
There are a lot of research even along the line of personas, which simply look into the same subject, that people may have different ways of thinking about a topic. And I think I completely agree with your remark about that they might have more cognitive similarities to their male counterparts. And I think they would be more on that spectrum than, let's say, with others. And yeah, but thanks. These are all great ideas.
This just very, very, very interesting things that your talk triggered me thinking. It's yeah, very, very nice talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It seems
yeah, we have a technical
yeah.
We have a technical issue again. But if we have no more questions, thank you so much for participating in this webinar. And thank you again, Ayushi, giving us today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye.